Daniel Parker grew up in a small village where money was scarce but dreams were free. His father worked as a farmer, and his mother stitched clothes for neighbors to earn extra income. From a young age, Daniel learned the value of hard work. He spent his days helping his father in the fields and his evenings repairing old machines in a small workshop behind their house. Despite his poverty, Daniel was intelligent and ambitious. He eventually found work as a mechanic in the city. The salary was modest, but he was proud to earn an honest living. One afternoon, while repairing a luxury car that had broken down on the roadside, Daniel met Sophia Wilson. She was beautiful, educated, and the daughter of one of the city's wealthiest businessmen. Unlike many rich people, Sophia spoke kindly to Daniel. What started as a simple conversation soon turned into friendship, and friendship eventually became love. When Sophia told her family she wanted to marry Daniel, her parents were furious. A mechanic? Her father, Richard Wilson, shouted. Do you know how ridiculous this sounds? Our family owns companies worth millions. Sophia stood her ground. I love him. After months of arguments, the wedding finally took place. But the Wilson family never accepted Daniel. At family dinners, Richard constantly mocked him. Tell me, Daniel, how many cars did you repair this week? He would ask sarcastically, while wealthy guests laughed. Sophia's mother often criticized his clothes, his manners, and his background. Daniel endured everything silently because he loved Sophia. Years passed, and the insults continued. Slowly, Sophia began changing. Influenced by her parents, she started comparing Daniel to wealthy businessmen. Why can't you be more successful? She asked one evening. Daniel looked hurt. I've always worked hard. Working hard isn't enough, Sophia replied. The words cut deeper than any insult from her parents. A year later, Sophia filed for divorce. I need a different life, she said coldly. Daniel stared at the papers in disbelief. You once said you loved me. I did, she answered. But love doesn't pay for the future I want. The divorce left Daniel devastated. He lost his home, his marriage, and nearly all his savings. One rainy night, Daniel sat alone on a park bench holding a single suitcase. Cars passed by as water soaked his clothes. At that moment, he made a promise. One day, he would become so successful that everyone who had looked down on him would regret it. The next morning, Daniel boarded a bus to another city with nothing but determination in his heart. Rise of the Millionaire. The bus ride to Riverside City took nearly 12 hours. Daniel spent most of the journey staring out the window, thinking about everything he had lost. Every memory of Sophia and her family felt like a wound that refused to heal. When he arrived, he had less than $200 in his pocket. The city was unfamiliar, crowded, and expensive. Daniel rented a tiny room above an old grocery store. The room was barely large enough for a bed and a small table. During the first few weeks, he searched desperately for work. Eventually, he found a job at a construction site. The work was exhausting. Every day, Daniel carried heavy materials under the burning sun. His hands became rough, and his body ached constantly. Yet he never complained. Unlike many workers who spent their evenings resting, Daniel spent his nights studying. He borrowed books about business, real estate, and entrepreneurship from the public library. While others slept, Daniel read. While others wasted time, Daniel learned. He understood that if he wanted to change his life, he needed more than hard work. He needed knowledge. Months turned into years. One evening, Daniel noticed that an abandoned warehouse near the industrial district was being sold at a very low price. Most people ignored it because the building was old and damaged. But Daniel saw potential. He spent nearly all his savings to purchase the property. His friends thought he was crazy. That place is falling apart, one coworker said. Daniel simply smiled. During weekends, he repaired the warehouse himself. He fixed broken walls, replaced damaged equipment, and cleaned every corner of the building. After several months, he rented the warehouse to a logistics company. The rental income was small at first, but it was enough to prove that his idea worked. Encouraged by his success, Daniel reinvested every dollar he earned. He bought another neglected property, then another, then another. Each investment generated more income than the last. Soon, Daniel no longer needed to work on construction sites. He established his own property development company called Parker Developments. The beginning was difficult. Banks refused to lend him money because he had no reputation. Large investors ignored him. Competitors laughed at him. But Daniel remembered every insult he had endured from the Wilson family. Those memories fueled his determination. He worked harder than ever. His breakthrough came when the city announced plans to expand its transportation network. Daniel recognized an opportunity before anyone else. Using all his available capital, he purchased several plots of land near the planned routes. Many people mocked his decision. "You're risking everything," one businessman warned. Daniel remained confident. A year later, the government officially approved the expansion project. Property values in the area skyrocketed. Overnight, Daniel's investments multiplied in value. His company grew rapidly. Major investors who had once ignored him now wanted meetings. Banks competed to offer him loans. Newspapers started publishing articles about the young entrepreneur who had built an empire from nothing. Within 5 years, Parker Developments became one of the fastest growing real estate companies in the country. Daniel purchased a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city skyline. He bought sports cars and traveled on private jets. The poor mechanic who had once slept in a tiny rented room had become a millionaire. Yet despite all his success, one thing never left his mind: the Wilson family. One evening, while attending a business conference, Daniel overheard two executives discussing financial troubles at Wilson Enterprises. He immediately paid attention. "What happened?" one executive asked. "They made several bad investments," the other replied. "Their debts are growing every month." Daniel remained silent, but inside, something stirred. For the first time in years, he felt that fate was bringing him back toward the people who had destroyed his life. Over the following months, Daniel quietly gathered information. The news was worse than he expected. Wilson Enterprises was drowning in debt. Several banks were demanding repayment. Major investors were pulling out. The once powerful company was beginning to collapse. Daniel sat in his office late one night, looking out at the city lights. On his desk was a photograph from years ago. It showed him and Sophia on their wedding day. For a moment, sadness crossed his face. Then he remembered the humiliation, the insults, the divorce papers, the rainy night on the park bench. He slowly placed the photograph inside a drawer and closed it. The past no longer controlled him. Now he had the power. A few weeks later, Daniel instructed his legal team to begin purchasing Wilson Enterprises' outstanding debts through several investment firms. The transactions were completed quietly. No one suspected anything. Not Richard Wilson. Not Sophia. Not even the company's board members. By the end of the year, Daniel controlled a significant portion of the debts that were keeping Wilson Enterprises alive. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. The time for revenge was getting closer. Very soon, the family that had once looked down on a poor mechanic would discover who truly held power. And when that day arrived, their world would never be the same again. Scene 3 will cover Daniel's return, the collapse of the Wilson family empire, Sophia's regret, and Daniel's final revenge and victory. The ultimate revenge. The headquarters of Wilson Enterprises had once been a symbol of power and success. The 40-story glass tower dominated the city's skyline. And for decades, Richard Wilson had proudly ruled his business empire from the top floor. But now, everything had changed. The company was drowning in debt. Investors had abandoned them. Several major projects had failed. Every week brought new financial problems. Inside the executive conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Richard Wilson sat at the head of the table, staring at a pile of reports. "We need capital immediately," one executive said nervously. "If we don't secure funding within 30 days, the banks will begin legal action," another added. Richard rubbed his forehead. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. Sophia sat quietly beside him. The confident woman who had once looked down on Daniel now looked exhausted and worried. "There's a meeting tomorrow," Richard said. "A major investor is interested in discussing our debts." The room became silent. Everyone understood that this meeting might determine whether Wilson Enterprises survived or collapsed. The next morning, executives gathered in the company's largest conference hall. Richard straightened his tie and tried to appear confident. The doors opened. A group of lawyers and business advisors entered. Then another figure walked into the room. Richard froze. Sophia's eyes widened in shock. The entire room fell silent. Standing before them was Daniel Parker, not the poor mechanic they remembered, not the broken man they had abandoned. This Daniel wore an expensive tailored suit. His confident posture reflected years of success. Behind him stood some of the country's most respected financial experts. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Richard managed to say, "Daniel?" Daniel smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson." The room felt colder. Sophia could hardly believe what she was seeing. She had heard rumors about a wealthy businessman named Daniel Parker, but she had never imagined it was her former husband. Richard cleared his throat. "What are you doing here?" Daniel calmly placed a folder on the table. "I am here regarding Wilson Enterprises." Richard looked confused. One of Daniel's lawyers opened a presentation. The first slide appeared on the screen. The executives stared in disbelief. Over the previous year, Daniel's investment firms had legally purchased most of Wilson Enterprises' outstanding debts. The room erupted with whispers. Richard's face turned pale. "This is impossible, Ika," he said. "I'm afraid it's very possible," Daniel replied. He stood and slowly walked around the table. "For years, your company borrowed money to survive. Those debts now belong to me." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "You planned this." Daniel looked directly into his eyes. "No, you planned this years ago when you decided that poor people deserve no respect." The room became silent again. Every executive understood that this was more than a business meeting. This was personal. Sophia lowered her head. Memories flooded her mind. She remembered the kind man she had once loved. She remembered every insult her family had thrown at him. Most of all, she remembered signing the divorce papers. Tears filled her eyes. "Daniel," she whispered. But Daniel continued speaking. "I came into your family with nothing but honesty and hard work. You judged me because I wasn't rich." Richard had no answer. For years, he had believed wealth determined a person's value. Now the man he once mocked controlled the future of his company. Daniel returned to his seat. "My team has prepared two options." The first option was complete liquidation. Wilson Enterprises would be sold piece by piece. The Wilson family would lose everything. The second option was a restructuring agreement. The company would survive, employees would keep their jobs, but ownership would transfer to Daniel's corporation. Richard stared at the documents. Either way, he would lose control. The empire he had spent decades building was finished. For the first time in his life, Richard Wilson felt the same helplessness he had once forced upon Daniel. Sophia stood up. "Daniel, I'm sorry." The room turned toward her. She struggled to hold back tears. "I should have supported you. I should have believed in you." Daniel looked at her quietly. Years ago, he had dreamed of hearing those words, but now they felt strangely empty. The pain was gone. The anger had faded. All that remained was understanding. "You didn't leave me because I was a bad man," Daniel said. "You left because you believed money mattered more than character." Sophia lowered her eyes. She knew he was right. Daniel signed the restructuring agreement. The company would survive. Thousands of innocent employees would keep their jobs. But the Wilson family would no longer own the business. The decision shocked everyone. Many expected Daniel to destroy them completely. Instead, he chose something far more powerful. He won. Not through cruelty, not through revenge alone, but through success. A few weeks later, newspapers across the country reported the historic acquisition. Daniel Parker became one of the nation's most influential businessmen. His story inspired millions. The poor mechanic, who had once been mocked and rejected, had built an empire through determination and hard work. One evening, Daniel stood on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the city. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. His phone rang. It was another business opportunity worth millions. Daniel smiled. His future was brighter than ever. As he looked across the skyline, he thought briefly about the past. Then he let it go. The greatest revenge had never been making his enemies suffer. The greatest revenge was becoming so successful that the people who once looked down on him were forced to watch him rise above them. And as the city lights began to shine below, Daniel knew that his journey was finally complete. The poor mechanic was gone. In his place stood a self made billionaire whose success would be remembered for generations.